Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. I'm Bob Rosieski. Thanks for joining me for another episode. As you can see, the table's starting to come along, and today we are going to be working on the aprons here and getting the tenons fit and getting this scroll work cut out. So come on along and let's get started. Alright, so now that I have the first face flat, I want to mark the board so that I can plane the other face parallel to this. Now we didn't do this with the leg stock because we weren't really all that interested in having two parallel faces. And really here we could probably do without it as well. But I think it's a good exercise to go ahead and do it. So I set the gauge to the thinnest dimension. So this corner right now here is the thinnest section that I have in this board. So I set the gauge to that thinnest dimension. And now, scribing off of the surface that I've already flattened, I'm going to go ahead and scribe my thickness all around the edge of the board on all four sides. So now with this side squared up, now I can put this board flat on my bench and I won't have to worry about using the wedges to take out any of that twisting or cupping. And I can go ahead and plane this face down to the line I just scribed. Okay, so as you make the last few strokes with the triplane and approach that line, what you're going to start to see is sort of a furry edge where your marking gauge was. When you start to see that little furry line, that little furry edge, on the long grain, you might actually get like a little feathered piece of wood that may actually even peel off, sort of like, the camera's probably not picking it up, but you can sort of see it down here. And along the end grain, you're going to get this furry look. That's your marking gauge line. So once you hit that, you can stop. Your board has been thickness down to your gauge line. And that's where we are here. At this point, I'm just going to divide the board in half. So I'm going to make a mark up this end, and I'll leave a little mark there, and I'll make a mark down this end, and I'm going to make another mark in the center just to help me in case my straight edge isn't long enough. I'll take one of my winding sticks, and I'm going to go ahead and connect those. So at this point, I have my rip cut made, my rip cut marked, laid out. So I'm going to rip this in half. So with one edge, with the rip finished, now I want to go ahead and clean up this edge and plane it straight. Now the easiest way to plane a straight edge is to actually start with a hollow or a concave edge. So I usually will work the center of the edge first until I don't get any shavings. Now what that tells me is I'm high on the end, so I can go ahead now and take full length shavings. And you can hear the plane skipping the low spot in the center. And what I'm doing is planing until I hear that pitch change, and then I'm taking a shaving full length. Almost there. One more should do it. Yep. And that looks pretty good. I'll make a quick check for square. And that is dead on. So I'm going to the height side of the story stick. I'm going to set my divider at the bottom of the apron. I'm going to open it up till I get to the mark that indicates the top of the apron. That is how wide my apron needs to be. I can then transfer that to my marking gauge. Sorry, I'm right-handed. I need to switch here. Lock it in. Take the marking gauge and scribe the final width so it'll go back in the vise, and I'll plane it down to the line. And we're good. So now I'll take it out, and I'm going to use my bench hook and a sash saw to go ahead and make the cut so that I can separate this particular piece into a long apron and a short apron. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and mark the shoulder to shoulder length. Now you got to remember, we've got two different length aprons. So make sure you're using the correct side of the story stick. So for this one, we want to use the width. We've got our shoulder to shoulder distance here on our story stick. Okay, so that's my shoulder. Now I'm going to put my shoulder from my story stick. I'm going to line that up with the line that I just scribed, and I'm going to go ahead and mark the other shoulder. So let's get that lined up. Okay, and this is my other shoulder line here. So I just leave a nick, and again I'll go in and scribe this shoulder, and I'm going to transfer the shoulder scribe across both boards at the same time. The reason for this is that doing this ensures that I have an identical shoulder to shoulder distance on both parallel aprons. And I'm going to do the same thing on the shorter aprons. I'm going to transfer the marks to both of them at the same time. So now I know that the shoulder to shoulder length on both of these aprons is exactly the same, and that's really what I'm concerned with. I don't care how long these tenons are, and you know, I've got some extra stock off the end here that I'm actually going to have to cut off. So I'm not really that concerned with how long the tenons themselves are. The critical dimension is that shoulder to shoulder distance. So by scribing both edges at the same time, I ensure that I have both aprons with exactly the same shoulder to shoulder distance. And that helps to maintain a square piece when we get to assembly. So now I will go ahead and transfer the marks around both of these pieces, remembering to only reference my square off one of these two reference faces. Alright, so with the shoulders scribed, the next thing I want to do is to actually mark for the tenon. So remembering that we decided we're going to make only 3-shouldered tenon, so we're going to have a shoulder at the front of the joint, we're going to have a haunch at the top, and we're going to have a shoulder at the bottom. we need to remember that as we lay this out. So what that means is I'm going to be able to lay this out with just a regular marking gauge. I don't need a mortise gauge to do this. And I'm going to break one of my own rules here, because I always say only to reference your square or your gauge off of the reference face. In this particular case, I planed the apron to thickness, and I am going to run the gauge off the non-reference face, but there's a good reason for this. Because we're only making a shoulder in the front, the critical tenon dimension is the thickness from the back edge to the front of the tenon, which is the same as our mortise, or 3/8 of an inch. So by running my gauge off the back face of the apron, what I can do is set my gauge once and not have to worry whether or not I'm scribing the correct tenon thickness. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to mark the waist so that I don't accidentally cut on the wrong side of the line. So now we want to mark the bottom shoulder. Again, here's our reference, so this is the top of our apron. So the bottom shoulder is also a 3/8 inch shoulder. Remember, we laid it out with our mortise chisel. So we can use the same gauge with the same setting, and we're going to just run it around the bottom. Again, I know I'm referencing off the non-reference face, but this is for waist. So we can go ahead, mark that, because we're going to cut that away. So that is our bottom shoulder. And again, mark your waist. Okay, now the top has a haunch, a 3/8 inch haunch. So it's very simple to use that same setting. Again, 3/8 of an inch. We're going to scribe, but we don't have to scribe all the way to the baseline because we're not going to cut all the way to the baseline. So I'm just going to darken in this line here so you can sort of see. So so we've got the shoulder. All right, so here's our shoulder here, and here is the 3/8 of an inch that we took away. Now what we actually want is a 45-degree angle. Well, because we came in 3/8 of an inch, if we just go over 3/8 of an inch, okay, use our chisel as a gauge, we can leave ourselves a mark there. Take our ruler or square or any other straight edge and go ahead and connect the mark, and you'll see here that is our 45-degree haunch because we came down 3/8 of an inch and over 3/8 of an inch, so we have a 45-degree angle here. So we are going to cut away this material here. We are going to keep this material here because that's the haunch that's going to sit inside that tenon. We're going to cut the haunch out first. So we're first going to cut this 45-degree angle for the haunch. Okay, and we just saw down to the line we scribed with our gauge. Then we can cut down to that line. There's our haunch. Now I'm going to clean that up a little bit with a chisel because the cut was a little rough. So I'll use the wide chisel and I'm going to just make a nice paring cut, easy paring cut, straight down, following my 45-degree line. Okay, and I'm going to clean this area up here as well. Using the wide chisel makes this job easier. Okay, so next I'm going to cut the shoulder for the tenon. Now remember, all we're going to be cutting here is the front shoulder and this side. We don't need to make any shoulder cut at the back because we're not going to have a shoulder at the back. And you'll notice that I am using a rip-filed saw to make this crosscut. The knife scribe that we made makes that possible. And try not to cut past your baseline. Once you get in the groove, you can usually go pretty quick. Good. I can now start my saw in the kerf from the previous cut. Time to make the cheek cuts. I'm going to make sure I saw to the waist side of the line. Turn it around in the vise. Again. Now I'm going to be sawing on the opposite side of the line because the waist is over here. Stand our tenon upright. Finish the cut. And the final cut is the bottom shoulder, and I still have the line across the top, so I'll just eye that cut plumb. So now I want to check the fit of this in one of my legs. Now, I want to make sure when I do this that I know where this is going in the final product. Do we fit from the saw? Just about. Looks like we need just a hair off this haunch. I'll pair that with the chisel. A little persuasion. And we've got a pretty tight joint there. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not going to make any adjustments to that joint right now. And that's what I'm really looking for. I want to try and get that joint to fit off the saw if I can. I want to do as little fitting as possible because it really takes a lot of time to do that extra fitting. So if I don't have to do it, I'd rather not. So if you do run into a fit problem with one of your tenons. One of the easiest things to do is to just pare the wide area until it fits. And I like to do this just by working across the grain with a wide chisel. Now I'm only using the 1-inch chisel here because that's what I recommended in the design notes. But I would actually normally use a chisel that's even wider than this, 1.5 or 2-inch wide chisel. And I'll just pare the high spot until I get a good fit. And the reason I like to pare across grain is because paring across grain, you can pretty much ignore grain direction and not have to worry about whether or not it's actually going to tear out or not. If you try and work with a long grain cut, what ends up happening is if the grain's not running in the right direction, you can get some serious diving. And there we go. So now we paired it and we get a nice snug fit. Now, another thing that you might find is that right down around your shoulder, sometimes you may find a gap. There's a very easy way to fix that problem. So what I want you to look at here is right along this very edge. What you see is there's sort of a shiny or burnished area here, and then the rough sawn area in the back. And what this is this is the area that was cut with the saw, and the shiny area at the edge is what was scribed with the knife. Now what we're really looking to do is to pare all this even with that knife scribe. So what I want to do is come in here with a wide chisel, and I'm going to pare all of this, pare this shoulder down, and I can even undercut it. And I'm going to use the area that I scribed with my knife as a guide. So I'm not actually paring the very edge. I'm starting in that 32nd of an inch, or however deep the knife scribe was, and I'm riding my chisel on that knife cut. And I can just come in here and pare that away. And you can even undercut it slightly to make sure that the outside of the shoulder is higher than the inside of the shoulder, and that'll ensure that the fit is tight right at the edge. We can take a smaller chisel to work here, and we can even come in here with the smaller chisel and pare this shoulder out. Now we should get a super tight fit at that shoulder that fits without any gap at all. Now once the tenons are cut and fit, we can go ahead and do the scroll work on the bottom edge of the aprons. So what I did is I went ahead and I made a pattern of what that scroll work is going to look like based on the design. So if you remember, this section here was proportioned, and the fillet at the top here was about 1/4 of this total height from the bottom of the apron to the top of the fillet. So how this is going to go in, the apron, will sit in here like this in the leg. But we have to remember that there is a knee transition piece that's going to go in here. Now if you remember from the design notes, that transition piece is the same width as the top of the leg block here. So I took my pattern and used that just as a guide, and then I added, you can see, about 1/4 of an inch here past the knee transition block, where I left a little bit of material there, so about 1/4 of an inch, and then that's where I started the scroll. So I went ahead and I made this pattern out of the same piece of 1/4 inch poplar that I used to make the leg pattern. This side here is perfectly square to the bottom, so what we can then do is just line it up with the shoulder of the tenon, the shoulder of the apron, and we can go ahead and trace the pattern on there. Flip it over. Again, line it up with the shoulder and the bottom of the apron, and trace it on this side. Now for the long aprons, obviously we're not going to complete the step there with the pencil, but all we're going to do, I mean, we don't want to just use the pencil anyway, so what we need to do is to set a marking gauge to this height and then go ahead and actually scribe that line. So I want to scribe with the gauge where the top of that decorative scroll cutout is going to be. Similarly, I'm going to take a square and a marking knife, and I'm going to scribe in the sides of the fillet, because I'm going to make some relief cuts there with a saw. Same thing on this one, this side here. Mark those fillets with the knife so that we can make some clean cuts. And I'm even going to take a chisel and deepen those sides just so they're nice and deep, because I want nice deep scribe lines there. Okay. Now I'm going to transfer those lines across the bottom. And really this is just to give myself a guide, because since all that bottom area is going to be cut away, I'm not worried about tear out. And I'm also going to draw some lines, and I'm just going to do this with a pencil where that little cove starts. And this is just for reference later. Now there's a couple of ways we can approach this. We can take the bow saw and scroll those out, and you can certainly go ahead and do that. And same thing with this, you can run the bow saw along here, but there's actually a faster and easier way to do it. What I typically will do with a design like this, because it's pretty simple, is I'm just going to saw most of it. So I'm going to saw relief cuts at the fillet. Now, for your long aprons, you can just make multiple relief cuts like you see here. Then what we're going to do is I'm just going to make a 45-degree angled cut. To remove the bulk of that waste. Again, you can saw that out with the bow saw if you want. Okay. So I've gotten rid of the majority of the waste around those cove cuts. Now I've got to get rid of this material in the center. The easiest way to do that is really just to chisel it out. So I'm just going to take my 1-inch chisel and start paring this material off in chips. Now as I approach that scribed baseline, I'm going to start making my cuts thinner and thinner, because I want to take them away cleanly and try and keep those cuts perfectly vertical. And when I get almost there, my last cut is going to be with the chisel right in the baseline. Right in that line that I scribed with the marking gauge. So now I'm going to take my smaller chisel because I want to clean up the fillet areas. So I'm going to again just make a vertical paring cut there with my chisel right in the knife line. Same thing on that side. Now I'll go in here and I can clean up. Looks like I didn't pare quite down far enough on this side. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I'll just take the chisel and I'll just clean this up. With a couple of paring cuts. Now, with the center section and the fillets all taken care of, the last thing that I want to take care of is the coves. Now, again, I mentioned you can cut those out with a bow saw, but actually, what's an even easier way, and this is where that in-candle gouge that I talked about in the first episode on the table comes in handy. What this is, it's a rounded shaped chisel called a gouge, and the bevel is on the inside of the curve, as opposed to a carving gouge, where the bevel is on the outside of the curve. These are sometimes called scribing gouges or paring gouges as well. And what we're going to do is use it as its name implies. We're just going to pair with it. And the great thing about this particular gouge is its curvature matches the curvature of this cove. And I did that on purpose so that I can use this gouge to pare straight down, and it will automatically create a perfect curve for me. Done. One more cut. Now it's done. So I don't need to sand that or smooth that or anything. It's done. Do the other one. Now if you need to, you can come in and smooth out this area in here with the file. And there you go. And again, the long aprons are done exactly the same way. You just need to take out this center section in pieces and then go ahead and smooth it out, make it the whole thing straight with the file. Much faster than sawing it and cleaning it up. So one last thing that we need to do before we dry fit everything up is to put a bevel on the back end of the tenon, because the two tenons are going to intersect each other inside the leg at a right angle. So we need to bevel those edges. So all I've done is I took a marking gauge, and this is the inside edge of the table. And I took a marking gauge and I scribed a line 3/8 of an inch down, because this is a 3/8 of an inch thick tenon. And I'm just going to take a chisel and I'm going to pare a nice bevel. Nice sharp chisel really makes this easy to do. And this doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it's going to be inside the mortise. Alright guys, well, I am pretty happy with the way this is starting to turn out. All the tenons fit well, everything is nice and snug, the shoulders are tight. I think we're ready to move on to the next step. And that's what we're going to be doing next time. We're going to talk about finishing off the legs now that the aprons are done, and fitting this thing up and gluing it together and assembling the base. So we'll be doing that next time.
Thanks for watching.